On the 18th of June 1815, a muddy field south of Brussels coughs up history like a bad joke. Smoke hangs low, drums ricochet. Somewhere under that powder haze, a stocky man in a grey coat adjusts his bicorn and refuses to blink. Now imagine the fog lifts, not for a British cheer, but for the thunder of French boots rolling unbroken across the ridge. What if Napoleon won at Waterloo? If the last great gamble of an empire paid out, would your morning greeting be bonjour by default, and your spell check insist on colour with a U because the emperor said so? I lean closer to the map in my head and feel it tilt. I can almost hear the clatter of sabres turning into the click of bureaucratic pens as Europe decides to stop resisting and start conjugating. The question is not only who rules the continent at sunset, but who writes the dictionary at dawn. "Marshal, the right is holding, but the Prussians are late," an aide blurts. Boots slick with Belgian soil. "Then we do not wait for fate. We make it," Napoleon replies, almost gentle, as if victory were a soufflé that only needs the right temperature. Cannons answer for him, and for one unreal minute, the ridge ahead looks less like a wall and more like a staircase. In my mind's ear, I hear 1,000 accents rehearsing a single future. What happens to Shakespeare when his iambs must bow to alexandrines? What becomes of London when it must think in French to buy its bread? A quiet voice inside me, half whisper, half dare, says, "This is the pivot where Europe learns to say we, in the language of 'we conquered you,' but very politely. The year is 1815, and Europe is exhausted. 2 decades of war have left cities charred, fields ruined, and kings nervously counting the days of their reign. At the center of this storm stands Napoleon Bonaparte, the Corsican artillery officer who had crowned himself Emperor of the French. He had rewritten the map of Europe with his bayonets, toppling monarchs, planting brothers on foreign thrones, and spreading a strange mix of revolution and dictatorship across the continent. By the spring of that year, his empire had already collapsed once. He was forced to abdicate, exiled to Elba, only to escape and return to power in what became known as the 100 Days. The crowned heads of Europe, Britain, Prussia, Austria, and Russia vowed to crush him once and for all. And so, on the rolling farmlands of Waterloo, in present-day Belgium, the fate of the continent came to a head. The battle was not just another clash of armies, it was a reckoning. The Duke of Wellington commanded the Anglo-Allied forces, a stoic figure whose calmness under fire masked his nerves. The Prussians, led by the aging Marshal Blücher, staggered their way toward the battlefield, promising to arrive, but never quite on time. Napoleon, meanwhile, wagered everything on speed and decisiveness, his trademark. Imagine the scene. Mud up to the knees, artillery wagons stuck in ditches, cavalry horses restless under the drizzle. A soldier in the British line mutters, "If the French come again, I don't know if we can hold." His comrade replies through gritted teeth, "Then we'll hold anyway." Across the ridge, a French grenadier writes in his journal, "Today we win or we are nothing." This was not simply about who would claim victory that day. If Napoleon succeeded, the entire balance of Europe would tilt. Monarchies would tremble. Revolutions might spread unchecked, and Britain's claim to be the island arbiter of continental politics would collapse. Waterloo was the fulcrum, and every musket ball carried the weight of history. But let us tilt the board. Picture the same muddy fields, but this time the dice roll differently. The French cavalry charge doesn't stall in the mire it slices through Wellington's squares like a knife through soft butter. The Prussians, delayed by flooded roads, march in circles 20 miles away, their boots sinking deeper with every wrong turn. And Napoleon, instead of hesitating, commits his imperial guard not at the last gasp, but at the perfect hour, when the British line is stretched thin and their powder nearly spent. The ridge that once held against him now buckles. Wellington, that imperturbable Englishman, whispers to a nearby aide, "My God, we are undone." The aide scribbles in his notebook, but the ink smears with rain and fear. Across the field, the tricolour surges, bayonets glittering under broken sunlight, and the cry, "Vive l'Empereur!" drowns out the last British volleys. In this altered thread of history, the French army doesn't just win at Waterloo, they annihilate the coalition's hope of restoring the old order. Napoleon stands victorious, mud-spattered yet radiant, as if destiny itself had been waiting for this correction. The Emperor breathes in the acrid smoke and remarks softly, "Europe is mine again." His marshals cheer, but one mutters under his breath, "For how long, sire?" For in this version, there is no exile to St. Helena, no lonely death on a windswept rock. Instead, there is an empire reborn, its flag stitched across every border, its language seeping into every contract and classroom. A new Europe not of nations, but of departments, each ruled from Paris with a fountain pen as mighty as any cannon. And with that, the age of Napoleon does not end in June 1815, it begins anew, 1815 to 1830. The second French century begins. Napoleon wastes no time. Britain, humiliated at Waterloo, sues for peace. The Channel Islands become French garrisons, and London signs what newspapers bitterly call the Treaty of Surrender. In Vienna, the Congress collapses like a house of cards, and the Austrian Emperor quietly learns French phrases for "Yes, sire." Paris becomes the heartbeat of Europe, its boulevards swelling with diplomats, merchants, and spies. In a smoky salon, a German intellectual mutters, "What is Germany now?" His friend answers, "A mere arrondissement of Paris." Meanwhile, Napoleon institutes the code Napoleon across the continent, ensuring that even shepherds in the Alps and merchants in Warsaw must file taxes in French. 1830 to 1870. The empire industrializes. Coal and steam are pressed into imperial service. Railways do not connect nations, they connect departments of a single empire. Trains from Madrid to Moscow carry not just goods, but inspectors, ensuring that French remains the official tongue. "Imagine," sighs one British factory worker, "we've been conquered twice, first by machines, now by grammar." Napoleon's heirs, wearing bicorns slightly too large, preside over an age of iron and vanity. The Eiffel Tower is built not as a temporary exhibition, but as a permanent imperial beacon. The French Revolution's ideals of liberté, égalité, fraternité are quoted endlessly, though mostly by men in uniforms holding bayonets. 1870 to 1914. The Pax Napoleonique. With Europe firmly under tricolour banners, wars fade. There is no Franco-Prussian war, because there is no Prussia left to fight. Instead, energy is poured into colonies. Africa, Asia, the Americas, the Louisiana Territory, never sold, blossoms into Nouvelle France, where farmers in Kansas argue about baguette prices. A curious American traveler writes in his diary, "Here children pledge not to the stars and stripes, but to the eagle of Napoleon, and yet they speak French with a twang that makes Parisians weep." 1914 to 1945. The century that never burns. The First World War never comes. With Europe under one emperor, there is no Sarajevo spark, no trench warfare. Instead, the empire hosts the Grand Exposition of 1914, where nations that are not nations send delegations to admire Parisian electric lights. The Second World War, equally absent. No Hitler rises because no vacuum exists. Instead, a minor Corsican bureaucrat tries to stage a coup, declaring himself Petit Napoleon II. He is laughed out of the chamber and reassigned to run a cheese festival in Dijon. 1945 to 2000, the global French millennium. When atomic power dawns, it is Paris that glows first. The first satellite launched into space is not Sputnik, but Étoile 1, carrying a croissant as humanity's gift to the cosmos. In classrooms from Cairo to Calcutta, children recite conjugations of avoir before solving equations. And every Hollywood film is subtitled in French, because English cinema never becomes the global giant. A director in California sighs. We tried to make our own movies, but the Empire insists on French actors. We renamed our town Boule de Neige instead of Hollywood. Doesn't have the same ring. 2000 to present. The French World Order. The 21st century dawns with French as the universal language of business, science, and even internet memes. Instead of LOL, the world types MDR. Instead of OK, people write d'accord. Search engines exist, but no one calls it Google Translate. There is nothing to translate. One language, one empire, one very tired grammar teacher. The citizen. A baker in Berlin wakes before dawn, kneads dough, and mutters in accented French, "Encore du pain pour l'empereur." He never asked to switch languages, but now his ledger, his shop sign, even the jokes on the street are written in French. "Do you miss German?" asks his daughter. He shrugs. "Sometimes. But bread is bread, and customers only pay in francs." His private thoughts, though, still whisper in the old tongue, as if resistance can survive in silence. The soldier. On the dusty plains of Spain, a conscript wipes sweat from his brow. He is Portuguese by birth, French by uniform. "Why do we fight so far from home?" he asks his sergeant. The sergeant replies flatly, "Parce que la patrie est partout," because the homeland is everywhere. To him, the tricolour flapping above is both a shield and a cage freedom promised, duty demanded. The politician. In London, now officially Londres-sur-Tamise, the local governor addresses Parliament. Not in English, which has been relegated to taverns, but in crisp Parisian French. "Gentlemen," he declares, "we are not conquered, we are united." A heckler in the gallery shouts back, "Tell that to Shakespeare, buried under translations." The chamber erupts in laughter, but the governor's smile doesn't reach his eyes. The merchant. In Cairo's bustling market, a spice seller advertises with a flair. "Cannelle, poivre, vanille, tous pour l'empire." His customers bargain in broken French, and he beams trade is brisker than ever. Yet he notices something. The old Arabic proverbs that once flavoured his sales are fading. Profit is higher, but the poetry of the street is slipping away. The narrator's aside. And in this French-ruled world, each voice adjusts in its own way. Some comply, some resist, most simply endure. The empire claims unity, but beneath the neat handwriting of Paris decrees, millions of accents and stubborn memories remind us, history is never written in one voice alone. Empires always imagine permanence, but victory breeds its own troubles. With France triumphant, the dominoes fall in unexpected directions. The Americas. The United States never becomes the colossus we know. Without English as a global language, and without Louisiana sold, the young republic is hemmed in by French borders on every side. Presidents deliver speeches in awkward, nasal French, and Congress debates whether baseball should be renamed balle de bas. One senator grumbles, "How can we be free if our national anthem rhymes in another man's tongue?" Asia. British India? Gone before it begins. Instead, it is the Compagnie Imperiale des Indes Orientales, that flies its flag over Bengal. French bureaucrats impose their infamous paperwork, demanding 3 stamped forms before any tax is collected, a Bengali clerk sighs. The British were stingy, but at least their forms were short. Religion and culture. The Pope in Rome now pens encyclicals in French, making divine decrees sound suspiciously like Parisian fashion advice. Hymns across Europe are rewritten with French refrains, and pilgrims complain that prayers take longer to recite because of all the extra syllables. Technology and science. When the telegraph hums, when the radio crackles, when the first lines of computer code are written, they all favor French syntax. Engineers at IBM in New York curse under their breath. These accents are impossible to program. Yet the empire insists innovation must bow to conjugation. And so the unintended effect of Napoleon's victory is not just a united Europe, but a monoculture so wide it stumbles over its own size. The world becomes easier to govern on paper, but harder to live in for people whose songs and sayings don't quite fit into the neat columns of French grammar. The empire has achieved what no conqueror ever did, unity through language. But in the quiet spaces, in taverns and kitchens, people still whisper in the old dialects, guarding identity like a smuggled jewel. The diary of a disgruntled British officer. The 20th of June 1816. They've ordered us to wear bicorns instead of bearskins. The lads look like angry waiters. I tried to toast the king last night, but was corrected. You mean l'Empereur? I nearly choked on my wine. God save us all, if only we could save our own language. The memoir of a Parisian bureaucrat. A clerk in the Ministry of Standardization brags that his greatest achievement was outlawing irregular verbs in conquered territories. It is progress, he insists. No exceptions, no dialects, only order. But his colleagues quietly note that the man has never smiled in his life. One whispers, perhaps even his emotions must be conjugated. The tavern singer in Dublin. A red-faced Irishman strums a lute and belts out, Vive Napoleon, long may he reign. Though I can't rhyme in French, it's driving me insane. The patrons clap anyway, half in mockery, half in surrender. Someone yells, play an old Irish tune! The singer shrugs. Not allowed, unless I translate the lyrics. And trust me, nothing rhymes with baguette. The schoolchild in Warsaw. A boy scratches in his copybook. Je suis tired. His teacher slaps the desk. Again, in French, with proper accent marks. He sighs and doodles a small Polish eagle in the corner, hiding rebellion in the margins. The inner thought of Napoleon himself. Even the emperor, late at night in the Tuileries, wonders if his empire is too vast. He stares at a map covered in blue, every border erased, and thinks, what if I have conquered so much that nothing remains to conquer except boredom? He sets down his quill, then chuckles. Nonsense. Tomorrow I shall standardize the size of baguettes. Through these scattered voices, the Grand Empire looks less like perfection and more like a comedy of human contradictions, where people adapt, complain, and laugh under the same imperial sun. Every empire reaches its breaking point, and for Napoleon's imagined dominion, it arrives not with cannon fire, but with carbohydrates. By the late 19th century, the price of bread regulated from Paris with mathematical precision sparks what historians later call La Grande Révolte du Croissant. Bakers from Lisbon to Krakow rise up, waving rolling pins like pikes, chanting, "No taxation without fermentation." In London, a crowd storms the governor's mansion, not to overthrow rule, but to demand cheaper brioche. "We'll need justice," one rioter yells, before realizing his pun is accidentally in perfect French. In Berlin, students occupy universities, scrawling graffiti, down with subjunctive verbs. Police erase it immediately, claiming the grammar was incorrect. Meanwhile, in Cairo, spice merchants form a shadow economy, smuggling cinnamon under sacks of onions. Because Paris insists cinnamon must be labelled cannelle, the black market thrives, and a British observer writes home, "Imagine an empire strong enough to conquer Europe, but fragile enough to be shaken by spelling bees." The emperor's descendants, desperate to restore order, convene the Great Congress of Parisian Pastry. Diplomats arrive in powdered wigs to argue over whether baguettes should be 60 or 62 centimeters long. The debate lasts 6 months, during which half of Europe starves waiting for official permission to bake. And so the empire that once marched with drums and sabers now totters on the edge of collapse because of flour, butter, and bureaucracy. The grandeur of conquest transforms into absurdity, and the cry of "Vive l'Empereur" is drowned out by the groans of hungry citizens begging for a crust of bread that isn't state-approved. The croissant crisis cracks the facade of eternal empire. By the dawn of the 20th century, the once unstoppable French machine begins to sputter. Departments from Warsaw to Dublin no longer send their reports to Paris on time. Governors translate decrees back into local tongues when no one is watching. Even the mighty Imperial Guard finds its uniforms moth-eaten, its marches drowned out by new songs sung in forbidden dialects. Yet the empire does not collapse in flames. It dissolves, slowly, like sugar in coffee. By 1950, local assemblies reappear across Europe, not in rebellion, but in polite requests to govern themselves. The emperor's heirs, weary of riots over bread sizes, quietly allow it. Soon, what was once a monolith of blue on the map becomes a mosaic of nations again, each one carrying scars of French grammar in their laws, recipes, and lullabies. And in our own day, the echoes remain. Children in Kansas still call their baseball bats bâtons de basse. Berliners curse fluently in 2 languages, often mixing them mid-sentence. Londoners sip tea but order it à la française, as if the empire never quite left. Napoleon's dream survives not in borders, but in habits, small, stubborn, absurd. History bends back toward diversity, but under the surface runs a curious thought. Once, for nearly 2 centuries, the world was nearly French, undone not by armies, but by appetite. And perhaps that is the truest legacy of Waterloo reversed, not glory, not tyranny, but the reminder that even empires rise and fall on empty stomachs.